The sun was sinking behind the jagged mesas, painting the horizon red like spilled blood. In the courtyard of the Dubrow Ranch, a woman lay broken on the hard ground. Her cheek was purple with bruises, her lip bleeding, her breathing shallow. Above her, a man in a dusty vest tightened his fist as if he wanted to strike again. His brothers stood nearby, boots grinding gravel, eyes cold as rattlesnakes. And then, from the shadows of the barn, her daughter stepped forward, Elodie, no more than 20, her braid falling loose, tears stinging her dusty cheeks. She dropped to her knees beside her mother, shielding her with shaking arms. "Enough," Elodie cried, her voice trembling but strong. "If you touch her again, you'll have to kill me too." Her words cracked in the air like a whip. The in-laws who had taken over the ranch after her father's death laughed bitterly. To them, she was nothing but a girl, powerless against their greed. But Elodie didn't flinch. She pressed her palm to her mother's battered face, whispering, "Hold on, Maman, I'll find help." Dust rolled in from the trail. A rider appeared in the dying light, tall in the saddle, hat brim shadowing his eyes. His horse snorted, muscles rippling as it slowed to a stop. The men cursed under their breath, uneasy at the stranger's arrival. Elodie looked up, desperate, meeting the rider's gaze. "Monsieur," she pleaded, her voice breaking, "help me, please." The rider dismounted, boots hitting the ground like thunder. He saw the blood, the fear, the cruelty carved into that moment. Slowly, he tipped his hat back, revealing eyes as steady as a storm that knows where to strike. His voice was low, but every word carried weight. "I ain't leaving you," he said. "Not now. Not ever." And just like that, the dust stilled. The ranch yard held its breath, balanced on the edge of something dangerous and unstoppable. The Dubrow Ranch had once been alive with music, laughter, and the smell of fresh bread drifting from the stone kitchen. Elodie remembered those days as if they belonged to another life. Her father, Bastien Dubrow, had been a proud cattleman with a heart bigger than the land he worked. He taught her how to ride before she could walk straight, how to read the sky for storms, and how to listen to the earth. "A rancher without honor is nothing but a thief," he would say. But honor could not shield him from fever. When Bastien died, the ranch fell into the hands of his wife's brothers-in-law, men who wore cruelty like a second skin. At first they pretended to care. They offered to help manage the land until Elodie was older. Her mother, Mariette, too broken by grief, accepted. But it wasn't long before the laughter in the house was silenced, replaced by the stomp of heavy boots and the sharp crack of harsh voices. The brothers tightened their grip on everything: cattle, money, even the very walls of the home. Elodie's mother became a shadow, her once bright spirit dimmed by constant insults, endless demands, and blows too often hidden beneath scarves. Elodie bore it in silence at first, tending to the animals, mending fences, whispering courage to herself in the dark. But as she grew, so did her fire. She saw through their lies, the way they sold cattle behind her back, pocketed the gold, and left her and her mother with scraps. They wanted her broken, docile, just another possession. And when she refused to bow, their rage turned violent. Still, Elodie clung to her father's lessons. She spoke to the horses as if they were family, and every night, she prayed to the stars for someone to come, someone with the strength to stand where she could not. She had no idea her plea would be answered not by a saint or an angel, but by a weathered rancher riding alone across the plains, carrying secrets of his own. The day her mother was beaten nearly to death was the day those prayers collided with fate. And fate had spurs. His name was Lucien Armand, though most who crossed his path only knew him as the rancher. He wasn't young but not yet old. His beard carried flecks of gray, his hands calloused from years of roping cattle and burying regrets. Lucien had wandered the frontier like a man searching for something he'd lost, though he never said what. Some whispered he'd left a wife and child back east. Others swore he'd once shot a sheriff in a crooked duel. The truth stayed locked behind his steady gaze, and that silence made him dangerous. Lucien hadn't planned to ride near the Dubrow Ranch. He was drifting, following no map, when the sound of shouting carried across the wind. He pulled his horse, Marichal, toward the noise, his gut tightening the way it always did before trouble. And when he saw Elodie shielding her mother's broken body, rage stirred in him, not the quick temper of a hot-headed gunman, but a slow-burning fury carved from years of watching strong men prey on the weak. As he stood before the brothers, their sneers told him they thought he was just another wanderer, someone who'd mind his own business and ride on. But Lucien's boots stayed planted in the dirt. He remembered his own failures, the people he hadn't protected, and the hollow nights that followed. This time he swore it would be different. Elodie looked at him with eyes wide as a wounded deer's, her braid half undone, her hands shaking from holding her mother upright. She didn't know him, didn't even know his name. Yet when he said, "I ain't leaving you," something in her chest unclenched as if she had been waiting years to hear those words. The brothers shifted uneasily, sensing the storm in this man's silence. And for the first time in a long time, Elodie felt hope crack through the darkness like the first ray of dawn. The courtyard felt like a powder keg, and Lucien's words had just lit the fuse. The three Dubrow brothers-in-law Gaspard, Noel and Roch closed ranks, their boots scraping in the dirt. Gaspard, the eldest, spat on the ground and sneered. "Ain't your fight, stranger? Best you mount that horse and keep riding, before the coyotes get fed." His hand rested heavy on the handle of his revolver, fingers twitching with ugly promise. Lucien didn't flinch. His hat brim shadowed his face, but his voice cut through the dusk like a blade. "She asked for help. That makes it my fight." His hand stayed loose by his side, not yet reaching for his gun, but the air around him carried the weight of a man who had drawn faster than most could blink. Noel snorted, mocking, though sweat glistened on his temple. "Big words for a drifter. You have no claim here." Elodie's heart was hammered. She could feel her mother trembling against her, Mariette's breath shallow and ragged. Fear pressed down on her chest, but stronger still was the memory of her father's voice. "Honor is what you stand for when no one else will." She forced herself to her feet, dust clinging to her skirts, and stood beside Lucien. "He does now," she said, her voice quivering but unbroken. For a moment, silence. Then Roch, the youngest and most reckless, drew his pistol. The sound of steel scraping leather echoed sharp against the empty sky. Lucien's eyes hardened. In that breathless pause, Elodie realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a standoff. It was the start of a war. Roche's pistol cleared leather, the barrel gleaming red in the last light of day. The trigger squeezed too fast for most to see, but Lucien had already moved. His hand flashed, his revolver barking once, sharp and merciless. Roche's gun spun from his hand, clattering to the dirt as he cried out, clutching his wrist. The sound rolled across the ranch like thunder, and everything changed in an instant. Elodie gasped, her hands clamping over her ears. The horses in the corral reared, eyes wide with panic. Mariette groaned softly, the shot echoing in her chest like a death toll. Gaspard and Noel reached for their weapons, but Lucien's aim was steady, his arm like iron. "Try it," he said coldly, his voice low as a growl, "and you'll be eaten dust beside him." The brothers froze, torn between rage and the fear of a man who'd clearly killed before. The courtyard crackled with tension. Elodie felt the dust sting her eyes, the air thick with gunpowder. She wanted to scream, to run, but her feet stayed rooted. She knew this moment was bigger than fear. This was survival. If Lucien left, she and her mother wouldn't live through the night. She swallowed hard, whispering, Don't let them take her." Lucien's gaze flicked to Elodie, then back to the brothers. He holstered his revolver slowly, the way only a man sure of himself could. "You're done here," he told them. "Pack what's yours and ride. This ranch doesn't belong to you anymore." His words were quiet, but they struck harder than the gunshot. The brothers didn't move. Not yet. And in the silence that followed, Elodie understood they would never leave willingly. This fight had only just begun. The brothers slunk back toward the bunkhouse, their curses drifting across the night air. Roche's wrist hung limp, blood dripping between his fingers, but Gaspard's eyes burned with vengeance. "This ain't over," he spat, his voice low and venomous. "That drifter won't see another sunrise." The door slammed behind them and silence fell heavy over the ranch yard. Elodie dropped to her knees beside her mother, hands trembling as she dabbed blood from Mariette's face with the edge of her shawl. Her mother's breath rattled shallowly, every exhale a battle. Tears stung Elodie's eyes, but she bit them back. She couldn't break now, not when her mother needed her steady. "Stay with me, maman," she whispered. "Please. You promised Papa you'd stay." Lucien crouched beside them, his weathered face caught in the glow of the lantern Elodie had lit. His hands scarred, calloused, hovered awkwardly before settling on Mariette's shoulder. He wasn't a man used to gentleness, but something in her broken body called to the part of him that still remembered love. "She needs rest," he murmured. "And clean water. I'll fetch it." His voice was softer now, stripped of the hard edge he'd shown the brothers. As Elodie worked, she stole glances at the stranger. Beneath his calm, she saw a weight in his eyes, a shadow he carried like a chain. He'd save them tonight, but not without cost. She wondered what ghosts haunted him, what wounds bled unseen beneath the tough leather of his life. For the first time, she realized he wasn't just a savior, he was a man running from something, same as she was. Outside, the desert wind moaned across the plains, rattling the shutters. Somewhere in the darkness, the brothers whispered plans of revenge. The night held its breath, waiting for the storm to return. The night was still when it came too still. Elodie had just finished cleaning her mother's wounds, tucking her beneath a quilt in the narrow bed. Mariette's face looked pale, waxed in the lantern glow, her breaths thin but steady. Lucien sat by the door, his revolver across his lap, eyes never leaving the window. The silence pressed heavy, like the desert itself was waiting. Then the dogs began barking. Their sharp, frantic howls split the night, followed by the acrid smell of smoke. Elodie's head whipped toward the barn. Flames leapt suddenly into the sky, orange tongues devouring dry timber. The cattle inside bellowed in terror, hooves pounding against stalls. Her heart clenched. "No!" she cried, rushing to the door. Lucien was faster. He shoved her back gently but firmly. "Stay with your mother," he ordered, his voice sharp but calm. He was already out the door, his silhouette swallowed by firelight. Gunshots cracked across the yard, flashes sparking from the shadows. Noel and Gaspard, rifles in hand, using the blaze as cover. Elodie's hands shook as she held her mother, but her eyes stayed fixed on the window. She saw Lucien cut through smoke, driving the corral gate open, freeing the cattle before the flames consumed them. His figure moved like shadow and steel, guns roaring back at the attackers. Every shot rattled her bones. The barn collapsed in a shower of sparks, fire painting the sky red. Gaspard's laugh rang out from the darkness. "We'll burn you out, girl. You and your hero both." His words sliced through Elodie's chest. She realized this wasn't just revenge, it was war, and her family's very blood was the prize. By dawn, the Dubrow ranch was a scar of smoke and ash. The barn lay in ruins, blackened beams jutting up like broken bones against the pale sky. The cattle, saved from the flames, wandered restlessly in the corral, their cries carrying the echo of fear. Elodie stood barefoot in the dirt, her skirts singed, her throat raw from smoke. The night had stolen something from her, her safety, her childhood, her home as she'd known it. Lucien returned from the ashes with soot smeared across his face, his shirt torn where a bullet had grazed his shoulder. He carried himself steady, but Elodie saw the stiffness in his movements, the pain he refused to show. She ran to him, her hands trembling as they brushed against his arm. "You're hurt," she whispered. His eyes softened, though his voice stayed gruff. "It takes more than lead to put me down." Inside, Mariette stirred, coughing weakly. Elodie rushed to her side, holding water to her lips. Her mother's eyes flicked to Lucien, then back to her daughter. In that faint glance, Elodie read something unspoken. Trust, fragile but real. For years, no one had stood between them and the brothers. Now, a stranger had drawn that line in the dust, and he hadn't moved from it. Lucien stood by the window, watching smoke curl into the sky. "They'll come again," he said flatly. "Men like that don't quit. They'll bleed this land dry unless someone stops them." His jaw tightened, eyes distant, as if he were fighting battles older than this one. Elodie swallowed hard, fear burning into resolve. "Then we stop them," she said. Her voice shook, but the words were iron. Lucien turned to her, studying the girl who refused to break. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his past lift, replaced by something new. Not redemption, not yet, but the beginning of it. And as the sun climbed higher, painting the sky gold, Elodie and Lucien both knew there was no turning back. The morning after the fire, the ranch carried the silence of a graveyard. Elodie rose early, brushing ash from her hair, her mind set on feeding the cattle before the brothers struck again. Lucien had warned her not to leave the house alone, but pride and desperation tugged at her heart. She slipped out quietly, a bucket in her hand, her braid bouncing against her back. At first all seemed calm. The prairie stretched wide and empty, the grass shimmering silver in the dawn. But as she knelt by the well, rope creaking as she lowered the bucket, she felt it, the prickle on her skin, the sense of eyes watching. Her breath hitched. She turned, heart hammering. Out from the mesquite stepped Noel, his grin crooked, his rifle slung casual across his shoulder. Well, he drawled, his voice oily as tar. The little lamb strayed from the pen. Behind him, Gaspard emerged, his face carved with fury, rock clutching his bandaged wrist. They spread out slowly, circling. Elodie's hand tightened on the rope, but her knees quivered. "You think that drifter can save you?" Gaspard spat. "He'll be gone by the weekend. Men like him don't stay. But we're blood. And blood doesn't wash away." His words sliced deeper than his threats. He knew her fears, the whisper she never spoke aloud that Lucien was only passing through, that one day she'd be left alone with nothing but ashes and bruises. Before Elodie could answer, the sharp crack of a rifle split the air. A bullet thudded into the dirt at Gaspard's feet, spraying dust. Lucien's voice carried across the field, hard as steel. "Step away from her." His silhouette appeared on the ridge, rifle leveled steady as a hawk's gaze. The brothers froze, curses spilling under their breath. Elodie's chest heaved, torn between terror and relief. In that moment, she knew one thing with unshakable certainty. If Lucien hadn't come when he did, she would never have made it back alive. They returned to the house in silence, the morning sun spilling gold over the plains. Elodie's hands still shook from the ambush, the echo of Noel's grin burned into her memory. Lucien walked ahead, rifle in hand, his broad shoulders tense beneath his worn coat. He hadn't said a word since firing that warning shot, but his silence carried more weight than thunder. Inside, Mariette stirred weakly, her eyes flicking from her daughter to the rancher. "They'll kill us," she rasped, her voice thin as paper. "Those men won't stop." Lucien knelt beside her, pouring water into a tin cup and lifting it gently to her lips. For a moment, his hard edges softened. "Not while I'm breathing," he said simply. Later, while Mariette slept, Elodie found Lucien by the corral, mending a broken fence rail. His movements were steady, almost ritual, but his eyes were far away. She stood quietly before asking, "Why are you helping us? You don't even know us." Her voice wavered, carrying the doubt her uncles had planted. Lucien paused, his hands tightening around the wood. "I once knew a woman," he said slowly. "Strong as iron, gentle as spring rain. She asked me to protect her. I failed her. She and our boy." He stopped, swallowing the words like they were poison. His gaze lifted to the horizon, eyes glinting with pain. "Been riding ever since, trying to bury what I can't forget." Elodie's chest ached at the rawness in his voice. She wanted to speak, to comfort, but the weight of his grief held her silent. At last she whispered, "Then maybe saving us is how you save yourself." Lucien's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. For the first time, he felt that maybe, just maybe, the ghosts he carried weren't meant to ride with him forever. But before the moment could deepen, the wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of hooves. The brothers were gathering men. And the final fight was no longer a question. The sun was sinking when the sound reached them, hoofbeats. Not one horse, not three, but a thunder of many. Elodie froze where she stood, her hands gripping the fence rail. Dust lifted on the horizon like a storm, and from it emerged the riders. A dozen men, hard-faced, rifles glinting, hired by her uncles for gold and blood. At their head rode Gaspard, his hat low, his smile sharp with triumph. Lucien stepped onto the porch, his rifle already in his hands. He studied the riders without fear, his stance calm as stone. "They brought dogs," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He knew these kinds of men, mercenaries who fought for coin, not honor. Dangerous, yes, but not loyal. If the fight turned, they'd scatter like leaves in the wind. Elodie felt her mother stir weakly inside, murmuring in fevered dreams. Her chest clenched. She couldn't let them take everything, not again. She stood beside Lucien, her braid falling loose around her shoulders, her eyes burning with defiance. "What do we do?" she whispered. Lucien glanced at her, the faintest hint of respect in his weathered eyes. "We hold. We make every bullet count." The riders spread across the yard, their horses snorting, leather creaking as rifles were leveled. Gaspard raised his hand high, his voice booming. "Time's up, girl. That drifter can't save you. Step aside, or we burn this house to the ground with you in it." His men laughed, a cruel chorus carried on the wind. But Elodie didn't flinch. She looked to Lucien, and he nodded once, slow and steady. Her hands tightened on the shotgun he had pressed into them earlier, the wood heavy but alive in her grip. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just someone to be protected, she was part of the fight. As the riders closed in, the sky bled red with twilight. The air thickened with the smell of dust and gun oil. And with the first crack of a rifle, the ranch became a battlefield. The first shots shattered the night, bullets slamming into the wooden porch, splinters flying past Elodie's face. She ducked, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Lucien's rifle roared in reply, each shot deliberate, precise. One of the hired guns toppled from his saddle, crashing into the dirt with a sickening thud. The others cursed and fired wildly, smoke filling the air. Elodie gripped the shotgun so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her hands trembled, her breath came in gasps, but she remembered Lucien's words, "Make every bullet count." She rose from behind the barrel where she crouched, sighted on a rider charging the gate, and pulled the trigger. The blast knocked her back, the recoil bruising her shoulder. The rider screamed, his horse rearing as he tumbled into the dust. Her ears rang, but her eyes widened. She had fired, and she had hit. Lucien spared her a glance, his face unreadable but his nod quick and approving. "Good," he barked. "Again?" She reloaded with clumsy fingers, sweat dripping into her eyes. The acrid smell of powder stung her throat. She wasn't just defending her home now, she was fighting for her mother, for her father's memory, for herself. The yard was chaotic. Horses screamed, men shouted, smoke rolled thick. Noel spurred his mount forward, aiming straight for the house. Lucien pivoted, his rifle raised, but before he could fire, Roche's bullet grazed his side, dropping him to one knee. Blood blossomed dark against his shirt. Elodie cried out, running to his side. Lucien gritted his teeth, forcing himself back up. "Stay down," he growled, though his voice was tight with pain. She refused. Her shotgun clutched in both hands, she stepped into the open, dust swirling around her like a storm. For the first time, the hired guns hesitated not at Lucien, but at the girl standing tall with fire in her eyes. And in that breath, Elodie knew, there was no turning back. She was her father's daughter, and this land was worth bleeding for. The gunfire roared like thunder rolling across the plains. Smoke and dust swallowed the yard, turning the air into a choking haze. Lucien fought like a man carved from stone, every shot finding its mark, but blood soaked his side, each movement heavier than the last. He staggered against the porch post, teeth clenched, refusing to fall. Elodie reloaded with shaking hands, her braid plastered to her face with sweat. She fired again and again, the recoil bruising her shoulder, the sound deafening her ears. But still the riders pressed forward, their numbers crashing against the ranch like waves against a cliff. Her lungs burned, her arms ached, yet she held her ground. Then came Gaspard. He dismounted slowly, stepping through the smoke with a pistol in one hand and a torch in the other. His grin was wide, his eyes alight with madness. "You think you can stop us, girl?" he sneered. "I'll finish what I started." He hurled the torch onto the porch, flames licking up the wood, heat searing Elodie's skin. She screamed, rushing to stamp it out, but Noel's rifle cracked, the bullet splintering the beam above her head. Lucien surged forward, fury blazing in his eyes. He tackled Noel to the ground, fists flying, the two men locked in a savage struggle. Blood spattered the dirt, the sound of bone against bone echoing through the chaos. Rock, pale and trembling, raised his revolver with his good hand, aiming at Lucien's back. Elodie saw it. Her breath caught, her heart freezing. Without thinking, she raised the shotgun, her hand steady as iron. The blast split the air, knocking Rock backward, his revolver tumbling from his grasp. He hit the dirt, motionless, the smoke from her barrel curling into the burning night. Silence gripped her for a heartbeat, the world narrowing to the body at her feet. She had killed him. Her stomach twisted, bow rising, but there was no time for grief. Gaspard's shout split the night, "You'll pay for that, girl?" And with murder in his eyes, he charged. The flames clawed higher, painting the night sky in orange and black. Heat rolled across the porch, sparks showering as timbers cracked. Gaspard strode through the blaze like a demon from hell, pistol raised, eyes locked on Elodie. His boots crunched in the dirt, slow, steady, savoring her fear. Lucien staggered upright, blood dripping from his side, his fists raw from the brawl with Noel. He raised his rifle, but it clicked empty. Cursing under his breath, he hurled it aside and pulled his knife instead. Every breath he drew rattled like broken glass, yet he planted himself between Elodie and Gaspard. "You'll touch her over my dead body?" he growled, voice low and ragged. Gaspard smirked, circling. "That can be arranged." He lunged, his pistol cracking. The shot grazed Lucien's arm, spinning him half around. But the rancher didn't fall. He drove forward, blade flashing. The two men clashed in the firelight, steel against steel, fists and fury, the crackle of flames their drumbeat. Each strike was desperate, savage, one fighting for revenge, the other for love and honor. Elodie, choking on smoke, saw her chance. Gaspard slammed Lucien against the porch rail, pistol jammed to his chest. "This ends now," he spat. Without thinking, Elodie grabbed the fallen revolver from the dirt of Roche's gun. Her hands trembled, but her aim was sure. She fired. The blast echoed across the valley. Gaspard staggered, shock twisting his face. He dropped his pistol, clutching his chest as blood spread beneath his vest. He turned toward her, mouth opening as if to curse her name, but no sound came. His body crumpled to the dirt, lifeless. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the burning porch and the ragged breaths of the living. Noel lay unconscious, Rock lay dead, and Gaspard at last was finished. Elodie stood frozen, the revolver heavy in her hand, the fire reflecting in her wide, tear-streaked eyes. Lucien limped to her, placing a bloody, steady hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he rasped. "You did it. You saved her." But the flames roared higher, threatening to consume the house. And inside her mother still lay. The fire roared, devouring the porch boards, sending sparks into the night. Elodie dropped the revolver and rushed inside, the heat scorching her skin. Smoke curled through the hallway, choking her lungs as she stumbled toward the bedroom. Her mother, Amarante, lay weak on the bed, her face bruised but her eyes flickering open at her daughter's touch. "Hold on, Mama," Elodie whispered, coughing. She tried to lift her, but her arms shook, her breath burning. Just when the smoke thickened to blinding black, Lucien appeared in the doorway, staggering but unbroken. He scooped Amarante into his arms as if she weighed no more than a feather. "Go," he barked, his voice harsh but steady. Together, they staggered into the yard, collapsing on the dirt as the house crackled and groaned. Moments later, the roof caved in with a thunderous crash, sparks rising like dying stars into the night sky. Elodie clutched her mother, tears streaking through the soot on her face. Amarante reached up with trembling fingers, brushing her daughter's cheek. "You're your father's girl," she whispered, pride softening her pain. Lucien knelt nearby, his shirt torn and bloodied, watching silently as the woman he had sworn to protect held on to life. For the first time since his own family's death, hope glimmered in his eyes. By dawn, word of the battle had spread. Neighbors rode in, shocked by the charred ruins, the bodies of the brothers, and the courage of the girl who had stood against them. Some whispered she had inherited her father's fire. Others swore the rancher beside her was the only reason she still breathed. When the sheriff arrived, he found Lucien standing tall, bandaged but unbowed, telling the truth plainly. The in-laws had brought this war and justice had been served. As the sun rose, painting the horizon gold, Elodie and Lucien stood side by side, their shadows long across the dust. Her mother rested safe in a neighbor's wagon, her life no longer in danger. The ranch was gone, but the land remained, and with it the promise of a new beginning. Lucien turned to her, voice quiet but firm. "I ain't leaving you. Not now. Not ever." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not of sorrow. Together, scarred but unbroken, they faced the dawn, two souls bound by fire, blood, and the unyielding will to survive.